Welcome to the Modern Application Development 2 screencast. In this screencast, we'll see how to use webhooks for server to communication with another server. You will need a Linux development environment and the project that we have been using until now. And then you will need internet connection and some tools that needs to be installed. So please pause and install the tools when I ask you to do. Now let's get into what is webhooks. There are many ways a server talks to a server in on internet, right? Let's say this is server 1 or your application 1, right? Talks to another server 2. Usually through APIs, right? Let's say this is server 1, it's asking, another server for weather. And this one responds with weather details JSON, right? So this is how usually server 1 talks to server 2. Now there could be a situation where you want to know from server 2 if there are any important weather events. For example, there is heavy rains or the temperature drop or temperature going high or there is winds, etc., etc. Now in your server you can keep calling every 5 minutes and checking the weather, saying please tell me if there are any weather events, any extreme weather events. If it's there, then it will send back. If it's not there, it won't. Now there could be calls you have to make every minute possibly to check if it's an important event, right? And that's a waste call because you don't want to make that call, right? Because most of the times there are no major weather events, but you can't stop checking because it's so important. So you have to keep checking, and most of the times it will return nothing. So this calls on the internet become 0. The load on the server 1 and server 2 also becomes a lot, right? So for such events or in such cases, we use webhooks. What we do is, instead of asking for weather and it responding, we'll give a server to a query saying whenever there's a change in weather or whenever there is a weather event, please send me the details whenever that happens, right? So there is no request response asynchronous call. There will be only one call, right? It's called a webhook. So this actually goes away and there will be only one, and it will send the weather as and when the weather event happens, right? So the note thing is as and when the weather event happens, send me the event details. Usually the sending happens over the internet itself. It's HTTP. Usually happens but it can happen through other methods too, but usually post, and usually post a JSON. It can post request parameters or XML or even simple text, but often JSON is used to a endpoint here on the receiver side, probably they would have received webhooks receiver for weather, right? This will be the endpoint. Okay, and then this URL will be given to server 2, so that server 2 knows it should call server 1 dot webhook underscore receiver / weather and post it to that endpoint, and so that server 1 gets it. So what is the advantage? The advantage here is you don't have to keep making calls to get an update, and you will get update as soon as possible, as soon as the server 2 has it and sends it. It's actually less load for both of them, and it's easier to program, right? You don't need to write loops, or you don't need timed inquiries, all of that. So this whole architecture or structure is called webhooks because you are hooking into the event. Right, now let's see how to implement it. First of all, let's see who are all the providers who provide this, right? sometimes the providers are weather providers like we saw here. Sometimes it could be payment providers. Let's say you created a payment request on, let's say, Razorpay or any other Stripe or any other player who actually processes the payment. If the payment is successful, they'll send you a webhook saying payment complete. Once you get details that payments are complete, then you can do an action of sending an email to your customer saying we have received all your payments, here is the order confirmed or whatever, right? Or if you are sending a courier, this is a courier provider, let's say India Post or DTDC or any of those providers, and they keep updating the status of the courier, that it has reached station 2, station 3, station 4, and that you can receive on your server to show to your clients that if you're shipping like an e-commerce one, you can always show them and update that your courier has been shipped, your courier has reached center 2, center 3, center 4. Instead of actually making calls every time to their server, you actually get updates from them, you store it, and from there you show it to your end user, right? So these are all real world scenarios that you can check out, like the interesting ones to explore are, for example, stripe.com's webhooks or razorpay.com's webhooks, etc. Or even GitHub and GitLab has webhooks, right? Here I have a repository called test, which is for testing, and within the repository I can have a webhook where I can configure who should receive what kind of events, right? Now to receive events, you will have to write the receiving point, right? So here it's like I said, it's going to be just a simple endpoint with post and JSON, and we'll have some validation. I'll show how to do validation, but there's no authentication as such, but there'll be header parameters that can be sent from the server 2 to server 1 to make sure that the data is coming from server 2 and not some random person on the internet. So we'll do try to implement one weather receiver, which is a simple controller, but I'm not going to put it into controller. We can just put it into just as a separate, because this is going to be like an integration point for your application with many other applications, right? So I try to keep it separate. Okay, let's do one thing. Let's add webhook receiver for GitHub. So once I receive, I'll get some headers, I'll get some request.json, whatever they want to send. I want to validate. If everything goes well, either I can process the data here, or if the data is a lot and it's going to take a longer time, I can call an async job. I can call task.something and call in async job, and also I can alert the user if it's required, saying I've received successful payments or successful commit or whatever that is, right? So I'm going to save this and start let's print this, right? Okay, and start the server. Okay, I think I've already started. Okay, so the one thing that we have not done is including that in the main. We have not imported that. Yeah. Okay, let's check whether we're going to make a post request to http://local host 8000 what is the endpoint /webhook/github, right? Okay, I'm going to make a post request, right, and create just send some JSON data, right? What I'm using here is called an Insomnia client. You can search. It's an open source application usually used for testing APIs to make all kinds of post get requests. Uh, instead of writing code to test, you can just use this client to make a call. Okay, I have to paste this URL here. Okay, then I'll send. Okay, I got OK as a thing, and the data here has been received. You can see hello world, right? JSON data. So this endpoint is working. As you can see, there is no authentication, right? Now let's go back and set up our GitHub. So this on this GitHub, whenever there is a commit, someone does something, whether it's commit, raising an issue, or adding an action, whatever they need, I want to know, right? I want to know on my server. I'll have to do something based on that. So I will do like an application JSON. I have to give an URL. Now there's a problem. Now I'm running locally. There's no way to give that URL here, right? So if you're using any online development environment, you could have given directly their path. If you were using REPL, you could have given the REPL production endpoint, right? Like your server endpoint. Or if you're deployed, you could give that endpoint. But I'm testing locally and I can't. So what do we do now? So we use services like either PageKite. You can look at PageKite. There are many services like this. PageKite is one of the open source one, which will actually forward local server to remote server with the given domain. So it's like hosting server from your machine. Like if you have like a local machine, and then if you have a service provider like this middleman proxy service layer like PageKite or ngrok or local tunnel, you can use any of them to expose your local machine ports to the internet, right? So that you don't have to be running this domain that is mapped to your local machine or with your static IP, right? So that it can be exposed and accessed through this. Now I'm going to show it through one of the service and not not through all of them, but you can check out PageKite, you can check out ngrok, or there is local tunnel, which is also free. Local tunnel, right? So here it's on GitHub. You can install it and use it. So it can expose in like port 800, and then it will give an URL to access that. Usually use it only for testing and don't use it for any production things. So this is only testing feature, right? So now I'm going to expose my local host, which will be local host 8000 through this service called ngrok, so that I'm running the command on the other screen. I'm not going to show it to you because it kind of exposes some of the privacy and password related issues. But anyway, I'm running on the client behind the screen. So now this same localhost is available on this endpoint temporarily. It's not permanent, it's temporary, right? So now I can use this in the same here. Right, and then send. So I'm getting hello world and OK, and you can see I'm getting that hello world here, right? So that should pass through. Now this is accessible on internet, and it's a temporary URL, so we'll use it only for testing. Now I can give that here, right? And like I want to choose HTML JSON format and not the XML or rather XWW format, URL encoded format. I want the JSON format. And then there is a secret. We'll see why secret is used. This secret is used to encode or send a header that we can validate that the data is coming from here. Otherwise, anyone could post here, right? They can guess if they can guess the URL, they can post to this endpoint. How will you decide it came from GitHub, right? For that, I'm just going to give you a dummy password, or like I'm going to create like a strong password of random numbers and strings, right? It's important to have a good password if you're, or this will work like a password, that's why, right? I'm going to have it here and create, and this is not to be shared with anyone. I'm going to remove this repo anyway, post this session, because I don't want all of you getting it. Now as soon as I click, it's added into the service. Now whenever there is an event, I should get the details here, right? So you already got one detail because it got added, right? Now let's see, let's do a commit, right? I'm going to open another tab and clone this repo because I've not done anything. I'm going to temporarily clone this, right? cd test git status. Now I'll add a file and commit it, okay? .txt git add x.txt git commit added. Now as soon as I push, this file goes to GitHub, and GitHub will push like a web hook to my server here, right? So it will come here and that will send the details to my server here, right? I should get details here. Okay, let's see. Okay, git push origin master. Okay, it's got pushed. You see, I received. You can actually format this JSON to see what it has sent, right? Is this related to this event? Okay, I think it's not printed as text, so it's printed from Python. So that's why it's not printed properly. Anyway, so you can see that I am the one who is pushed to the repo, and all the details of the repo, etc., are here, right? Including my email, who is the one who committed, all of those details. So this is the one which got pushed. You can see that these are the headers it's sending, and we should verify this. Based on, we should get this from the header in our code, and we should generate it, and then we should check. Let's say, okay, in Webhook, in GitHub thing, they'll tell you how to validate it. Usually all of them tell you, or any kind of providers. Okay, here it is. How to receive, and then how to validate. Alright, click on the webhook, validating the payloads from GitHub. So you should actually read the body and verify the signature, like it uses HMAC. So they would have given some example code that you can use to verify. Here I think they've given Ruby code, but you could actually use any other language as well. What they're doing is, here they're taking the secret token and payload body and then creating a SHA-256 of it, and making HMAC, and then that's what they're comparing, right? You could try out doing that by, I'll just show you how whether you will really receive the header, right? Let's add another edit x.txt. Okay, it hasn't received. That's because my ngrok has been down. Let me start the ngrok. Okay, let's check whether the ngrok is working. Okay, it seems to be working. Let's change or check whether it's the same ngrok, because ngrok changes it every time you start it again, right? Okay, update webhook. Okay, let's see here. I think it has got, I can just resend again to see. Redeliver. Yes, redeliver. You can see that you got, right? I think there is some error on how it's printing, but that's fine. You can see the JSON has been printed here. I resent it, and then it's not printing the header. Request object has no attribute called header. Okay, is it headers? It's headers. Okay, let's try once more. Okay, that is not the URL. Again, I made the same mistake. This is the URL. So this is something that you need to be sure when you're developing locally, that your URL is same. Okay, it's something. Okay, it has to be restarted. Okay. Okay, it's working now. So now either I can commit and push once more. For testing purpose, I can just click on redeliver. Right, it got redelivered. So you can see that it has received headers too. Now you usually use this signature SHA-1 or SHA-256 to validate. To validate, you have to get the JSON body and create an HMAC, to actually compare and validate. I'll leave that as an exercise. That's important to do. So I've written a thing here, validate. You have to get, from the headers, you have to get this, like for example, GitHub auth key is equal to request dot headers, and then form, using this body, form the actual JSON, and then generate the key and compare that key to this key, and they should match. That's the logic. You can use pre-built functions. Most providers will give you. So here I've shown one example with GitHub. Similar examples are possible with many other providers, and most of the integrations that you do with external partners on the internet will be through webhooks. Now there's a good tutorial at the request bin that you can go through, which also explain what it means, and what are the tools, and what is the user fit, how do you set up, how do you test, all of that, right? And this is one of the most important features of the web, in the sense of how people have invented new protocols on the web to suit the requirement. And webhooks are used a lot to share the events across the system, right? And I hope you will end up getting used. I hope you will end up using webhooks in your application to receive and process the data. Right, there is another part of the webhooks where actually you can send out the webhooks. You can be the provider, right? Here, if you see, this is the provider and this is the consumer, right? Because we are receiving. But what if there are events that you are generating and someone else is interested in it? For example, a messaging service, right? Let's say there is a messaging service, and that could be Google Talk webhooks, right? Let's say this was Google Room or Google Talk or some other messaging service which also gives a webhook called message, right? And then you could be pushing details to that based on the updates in your application, and in that case you become the provider and this becomes the consumer. So you could try out that too, trying to become a provider. But in most cases you will be a consumer, and since you will be integrating with multiple other providers. Yeah, I hope you will end webhooks, and it's fun and it's the easiest way to integrate services on the web. Thank you so much for watching.